The windmill stood tall against the gray horizon, its wooden blades creaking softly in the damp breeze that swept across the Dutch countryside. It was a relic of a quieter age, before the war, before fear became a companion in every home, before voices were silenced. To most, it was simply a mill, a landmark for weary travelers and a workplace for the farmer who ran it. But to those who knew its secret, it was a symbol of defiance, a tower of hope where whispers became resistance, and silence was the enemy. Hendrik van der Meer had been a miller all his life. His father and grandfather before him had ground grain for the local villages of Friesland, a quiet northern province of the Netherlands. Before 1940, his days were simple. He rose before dawn, fed the hens, turned the sails of the windmill, and worked until the last light fell over the fields. But when the German occupation began, the windmill became more than his livelihood, it became his weapon. It started small. The Germans had taken over the nearby town, stationing troops in the main square and seizing livestock from farms. The countryside, once filled with laughter and trade, fell into uneasy quiet. Radios were confiscated, newspapers censored, and those who spoke out disappeared into the night. The Nazis wanted silence, control over thought itself. Hendrik, a man of few words, understood the danger of silence better than most. It could crush a people more effectively than bullets. The local resistance movement had been growing, though cautiously. Flyers were passed secretly, coded messages scribbled into letters, and underground newspapers whispered truth to those brave enough to read. Hendrik had no political ambition, he was a man of the soil and wind. But when his neighbor, Peter, a schoolteacher, was taken by the Gestapo for owning a hidden radio, Hendrik's quiet resolve hardened. A week later, Peter's wife came to the mill, eyes red from crying. "They took him," she whispered, clutching Hendrik's sleeve. "He was sending messages, trying to tell London what's happening here." Hendrik nodded, his jaw tightening. The Germans had taken not just men, they had taken the voices of the village. Without those voices, the people would lose hope, lose the sense that the world still cared. That night, Hendrik climbed the wooden stairs to the top of the windmill, where the gears groaned softly in the wind. He looked out over the fields, at the faint glow of the German outpost in the distance. The stars were dim that night, the clouds heavy, and yet the sound of the windmill blades reminded him that movement still existed, that the world could not be completely stilled. He made his decision there and then. The mill would turn, but not just for grain. Hidden deep beneath the floorboards of the storage room, Hendrik began to build something forbidden, a radio transmitter. It was a dangerous task. Parts were scarce, and discovery meant death. But help came quietly from unexpected places. Old Willem, the village blacksmith, brought him bits of copper wire under the guise of repairing farm tools. A young boy named Lucas, who delivered flour by bicycle, carried messages wrapped inside the paper sacks. Even Hendrik's niece, Anna, a nurse in town, helped by slipping stolen batteries and code sheets into her medical bag. Together, this unlikely band of villagers built what they called de stem van de wind, the voice of the wind. For weeks, they worked in silence, timing their efforts with the creaks of the turning sails above. The radio was small, fragile, but powerful enough to send brief bursts of Morse code across the sea. Every message was a whisper of truth, a list of troop movements, names of missing villagers, reports of German supply routes. London was listening, and soon. So was the Dutch resistance network. The first time Hendrik sent a message, his hands trembled. The coded signals tapped out into the night, carried invisibly across the airwaves. "This is Friesland. The wind still blows." It was a simple phrase, but in those few words lay defiance and hope. The risk was immense. German patrols often searched rural homes for illegal radios. Villagers were shot for less than that. Hendrik created layers of deception. Sacks of grain hid the radio beneath false floors, gears and pulleys masked wires that ran up the windmill's frame. He even adjusted the sails so that when they turned at certain angles, they shielded the faint hum of the transmitter. To the occupying soldiers, Hendrik was just another farmer, a quiet man who kept to himself, respectful and obedient. They often visited his mill to requisition flour, and Hendrik served them with stoic politeness. All the while, his mind calculated risks and signals, the perfect times to broadcast when the wind covered the sound. One winter evening in 1943, the Germans began a new campaign of terror. They suspected that illegal radios were operating in the northern provinces. Whole villages were searched, radios confiscated, families interrogated. Hendrik's heart pounded when he heard that a nearby miller had been shot after hidden wires were found in his barn. That night, Anna arrived at the mill under the cover of darkness. Her face was pale. "They're coming this way," she said. "The Gestapo will search every farm by morning. You have to stop." But Hendrik shook his head. "If we stop, we lose everything. Silence is what they want." He turned toward the transmitter, adjusting the dials with steady hands. "One more message," he said quietly. "For Peter. For all of them." Anna watched as the light of the small radio glowed faintly in the shadows. The wind howled outside, and the sails of the mill began to turn slowly, as if echoing Hendrik's heartbeat. That night, the message went out. Enemy movements confirmed near Leeuwarden. Villages under search. Resistance remains. Minutes later, the power flickered. The German patrols had arrived sooner than expected. Anna gasped, but Hendrik didn't move. He shut off the transmitter, covered it with sacks of flour, and turned toward the stairs. "Hide upstairs," he whispered to Anna. When the soldiers entered, their boots stomped heavily on the wooden floor. The leader barked orders in harsh German, demanding to see the storerooms. Hendrik followed them silently, his face calm, his heart pounding like the gears above. They searched everything, the flour sacks, the walls, even the attic, but they found nothing. Hendrik had hidden the transmitter inside the hollow base of the main millstone, where no one would think to look. After an hour, the soldiers left, frustrated and empty-handed. When they were gone, Hendrik climbed back to the top of the mill and looked out at the fields. Snow was falling softly now, covering the scars of war with a fragile peace. He exhaled, a cloud of breath disappearing into the night air. Weeks passed, and the voice of the wind continued to broadcast. Each message carried new hope, reports of Allied advances, coded updates from London, instructions for sabotage. The network of farmers and villagers grew stronger, bound by their shared secret and the hum of the invisible waves that connected them. But the war was tightening. In early 1944, Hendrik received a warning from a contact in the resistance. The Germans had triangulated the signal. They knew a transmitter was operating near his village. Hendrik had two choices: destroy the equipment or flee. He did neither. "This mill has stood for 100 years, he told Anna when she begged him to leave. "If it falls, it will fall. For something." That night, he prepared one final message. The storm outside was fierce, the wind howling like the voices of the dead. He tapped out the code with determination, each pulse echoing through the wooden beams. "This is the voice of the wind. We will not be silent. The land still breathes. The people still fight. The wind still turns." Moments after the message ended, headlights appeared on the road below. German trucks. Hendrik turned off the transmitter, pushed Anna toward the hidden hatch under the stairs, and whispered, "Go. Don't look back." The soldiers stormed in moments later, shouting, overturning barrels and furniture. Hendrik stood by the grinding stone, his face lit by the oil lamp. "Where is the radio?" the officer demanded. "I grind wheat," Hendrik said quietly. "Nothing more." They tore the mill apart, and eventually, they found the wires. The officer smiled coldly. "So, the miller speaks after all." Hendrik was taken that night. The villagers watched silently as the trucks drove away, the windmill's sails still turning slowly in the moonlight. For months, the windmill stood empty. The Germans sealed it off, but they couldn't silence its presence. The villagers began to leave small offerings of grain and flowers at its base, whispers of gratitude for the man who had refused to surrender to silence. Anna, who survived by hiding with the resistance, never forgot that night. After the liberation in 1945, she returned to the village. The war had ended, the Germans gone, but the scars remained. The windmill stood weathered but unbroken. Inside, she found the transmitter, damaged but intact, still hidden within the millstone. On the wall, scratched faintly into the wood, were Hendrik's last words. "The wind carries all voices. Let it never fall silent." In the years that followed, the windmill became a memorial. People came from across the country to see it, to hear the story of the miller who fought with airwaves instead of bullets. The children of the village would climb the stairs and listen to Anna tell the story of her uncle, the man who turned a farmer's tool into a symbol of resistance. She would tell them how he understood that silence was the real enemy, how he believed that even the faintest whisper could carry across the world if the wind was right. And when they asked if she thought he ever heard the reply from London, she would smile sadly and say, he didn't need to. The world heard him in the end. Decades later, the mill still turns. The sails creak as they did during those dark years, and on quiet nights, when the wind is strong, the villagers say you can hear the faint rhythm of Morse code in the air, a ghostly echo of the man who refused to let his people be silenced. Tourists come now, snapping photos and reading plaques. But for the older villagers, it's not a monument, it's a living memory. They see Hendrik's silhouette in the doorway, hear the hum of his transmitter, feel the defiant heartbeat of the wind itself. In one corner of the restored mill, behind glass, sits the original radio transmitter. The label beneath it reads, De stem van de wind, the voice of the wind. Used 1943-1944 by Hendrik van der Meer to send messages to the Allied forces. Discovered after liberation. Every year on the anniversary of the liberation, the villagers gather around the mill. They bring candles and grain, and they let the sails turn freely, catching the night wind. As the blades move, the air fills with the same sound that once masked forbidden messages, a whisper of defiance, a promise that silence would never again rule the land. Anna, now old and frail, would sometimes visit, sitting on the bench beneath the great wooden frame. She would close her eyes and let the sound of the sails take her back to that night, when courage lived in the hum of a secret machine and the strength of a farmer who believed that freedom was worth every risk. The wind still blows, she would murmur softly, repeating his words. And it carries his voice. Because the war may have ended, but the battle against silence never truly does. Somewhere, someone will always try to quiet truth, to stifle freedom, to turn human voices into obedient murmurs. But as long as the wind turns the sails of that old mill, Hendrik's spirit continues to speak, reminding all who listen that courage can take many forms, and that sometimes, resistance sounds not like gunfire, but like the steady creak of a windmill cutting through the night. For the people of Friesland, Hendrik van der Meer was more than a farmer. He was their voice of the wind, the man who taught them that even when the world is shrouded in fear, there is always a way to make the truth heard. And so the mill turns on, year after year, a monument not of stone or steel, but of sound and memory. The wind hums its eternal song across the fields, whispering stories of the man who dared to speak when silence was death. The children of the new generation climb the hill, listen to the guide's story, and look up at the sails. They don't see just wood and cloth. They see movement, persistence, and the invisible strength of one farmer who turned his war against silence into a victory for all who believe in freedom. And as the sun sets behind the windmill, casting long shadows across the golden fields, the blades catch the wind once more. They turn, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of a land that remembers. The wind carries his voice still. The world listens.